Welcome to the Fringe. I'm Laura Donnelly, health editor of The Telegraph. We've got a lot to talk about. It's been a very big year for the NHS, and the question we're going to be addressing is, what's the plan? Obviously, we've got a 10-year plan coming up. This year, I guess we've seen a bit of focus on the past. We've had the 70th anniversary. We've also looked to the future with a promise of a £20 billion funding investment. We've seen quite a lot of change. Just after becoming the country's longest-serving health secretary, Jeremy Hunt was replaced by a new health secretary who's already identified his key priorities: workforce, technology and prevention. But we're looking at the long term. We're also going to be looking at the short term, heading into autumn, heading towards winter. There'll be some challenges ahead for the NHS, no doubt. And we also expect to see some sense of direction about the future of the NHS. We've got a publication of an NHS 10-year plan, and we've got the Social Care Green Paper. We've had a few hints along the way as well about what priorities might be: mental health, cancer, heart disease, all identified as key areas. And there's a lot of debate about the role of targets and whether the system needs to change. So I'm really delighted to welcome our varied and insightful panel. To my far left, Neil Dixon, who's been Chief Executive of the NHS Confederation since last year, before that Chief Exec of the GMC and the King's Fund. To my immediate right, Alan Mack, a former lawyer, MP for Havant, and also founder of the all-party parliamentary group on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. To my left, Nick Kay, who's a third-generation pharmacist and a board member of the National Pharmacy Association. And to my far right, Robert Colville's Chief Executive of the Centre for Policy Studies. So we'll kick off, first of all, with Neil, if you can talk us through what you think the priorities should be for the NHS.
Thanks very much indeed. So the first point to make, I suppose, about the NHS plan is the NHS plan is for England, not for Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland, all of which have in various forms their own strategies and plans. Second thing is, I think one should always be slightly wary of plans. Certainly things like a 10-year plan almost never survive for the 10 years. They're a helpful way of setting direction and focus for an organisation, but of course they shouldn't become a straitjacket. And frankly, the next 10 years are going to be, by any standards, a roller coaster in terms of the NHS and the kind of challenges it faces. I suppose the first thing to say is around the money. 3.4% of the NHS England budget is what the government has committed. In effect, that probably boils down to somewhere between 3.2% of the entire health budget. The bits that are excluded include capital expenditure, public health, and training of staff, all of which, of course, are very significant parts. So if you add it as a percentage of money, if you include them, of course, the total amount going in. Perhaps even more significantly than all of those, it does not include social care. Some of you will be aware that the Confederation commissioned the Institute for Fiscal Studies and the Health Foundation to look at to project ahead in the most objective way possible, to look at the kind of demographic and technological pressures that we would face as a country over the next 10 years in both health and social care. And their conclusion was that we would need 4% per annum in real terms over the next 10 years because of what was going to hit us, and actually to try and get back up to where we were, because we've obviously had a period of very significant austerity where we're no longer meeting, for example, our NHS constitutional standards. I think one of the other points, just to put on the side of this before anybody gets carried away, the reality is, first of all, that 4% a year is roughly what the trend would have been between 1948 and 2009. I mean, it's like the Himalayas, it goes up and down. It's not constant, which is one of its problems. But overall, across that period, that is roughly what we've spent, just under 4% per annum over all that period. The other point is that we're just the same as every other industrialized country. So if you want to look at other alternative systems to the NHS, it's the story everywhere. The point that the IFS did make very clearly in the report was, up until now, if you look at taxation, we've managed to do that without increasing taxation, the proportion of tax that is actually spent. And the reason is, of course, we spent less on defence, we spent less on housing as we've gone forward, and of course over the last few years the NHS has done relatively well compared. It hasn't done well, but it's done relatively well compared with other bits of the public sector. So we face a very significant challenge, whatever your beliefs about the method by which we deliver healthcare. From our point of view at the Confederation, where we represent both NHS and independent sector providers and commissioners across the health care system, ironically, one of our first priorities is social care. That wouldn't have been said by the NHS some years ago. And the government has not yet announced what it is going to do either in funding or in the reform of social care. But unless we solve social care, we will not solve our healthcare problems. So for us, that is a huge problem. I spoke to a director of nursing very recently, and her response, standing in a pretty crowded and busy accident emergency department, was, if you're getting any extra money for the system, don't bring it here first, bring it to social care, because social care, in a sense, or the absence of it, is causing this problem and this strain within the acute sector. So I think there's a greater awareness on a positive side about the healthcare system. Now finally, just to look at what should the priorities of the plan be, apart from we wanted a health and care plan. I think just doing an NHS plan is not right, and I think the key point first is secondly, I think, let's not rush with a plan. We originally, the reason why we had to rush a plan out was it was going to justify the budget. Now it happens the budget is coming before the plan. So I think our argument would be, yes, I'm sure politically you need to say here are some things which the extra money will do, and that's perfectly reasonable for the centre, for government and the NHS bodies nationally to say. But actually we need to have, for the first time I would argue, a proper engagement with the health service, with local government, with independent sector and community providers, and indeed with the wider public about what we expect the NHS to achieve. Because the big question that's hidden below all this is, how do we make this system sustainable over the next 10 years? Because frankly, in its current state, it is not sustainable. We have not yet worked out a way in which we try and reduce the demand which is being put onto the acute sector, and we can't simply keep growing. The IFS report said a 50% increase in the hospitals that we would need over the next 10 to 15 years if we just kept on going as we are. We can't possibly afford that. Therefore, we've got to start looking at building up community and primary care services and linking them much better with social care, and then make the connection into and out of the acute sector much better. In other words, we need to reform our supply chain. That's a big transformation in what we're expecting NHS and other organisations to do, but that, for me, has to be at the absolute heart of the plan. And my worry at the moment is that NHS England have embarked on, I think it's 17 different themes, asking little bits of the service, what would you like, which is very nice, but that doesn't add up to a plan. That adds up to 17 bids for the money, and actually a lot of these individual bids would take up all the money all by themselves. So we need to keep an overall picture. How are we going to make this system sustainable over that 10-year period? And that would be my plea to NHS England.
Great. Well, some direct challenges there, I think, Alan, for you really, in terms of what should the government do, what mistakes does it risk, and I guess the big focus there on social care in particular.
Well, thanks, Laura. Thanks to the CPS and the NPA for putting this event on. As the NHS celebrates its 70th anniversary, we Conservatives have a long and proud record of healthcare investment. It was a Conservative health minister that first put forward the idea of an NHS. It was for 40 of the 70 years that the NHS has been created. It's been under the care of Conservative ministers, and of course I welcome the £20 billion £20 billion a year extra that the Prime Minister has committed to it. But despite all of that, we still have huge challenges to make the NHS fit for the future. And part of my work over the last 18 months, which culminated in this report that I wrote with the CPS, Powerful Patients, Paperless Systems, is what's the next step? Well, my argument is the next step, and part of the plan, key to our plan to renew the NHS, is to upgrade the technology that the NHS runs on. And as an example of the challenges that we still face, the NHS is the world's biggest consumer of fax machines. there are over 100,000 pages still used across the whole of the NHS in England. So still a lot of outdated technology. And we all know that we meet at a time when AI, big data, robotics, automation, precision medicine are really transforming the healthcare landscape as the fourth industrial revolution accelerates. So there's lots of exciting opportunities and new technologies. And the key to our plan to renew the NHS must be to use technology to transform the experience of patients and to put patients in control and to make sure the systems that are serving those patients are all paperless. So there's really three things that we need to do as part of our plan in the years ahead. The first is we need to move the NHS from a paper-first organisation into a digital-first organisation. We need to ensure that in 10 years' time, in 2028, every interaction within the NHS is entirely digital. Part of that is building a new app, a better one than the one you've seen this week, but an app nonetheless, which will allow patients to access their medical records, to book repeat appointments, and to order prescriptions, which I'm sure the NPA will be very interested in. So an app and technology at the fingertips of patients is absolutely crucial to putting them in the driving seat of care. Second thing we need to do is to build a wider ecosystem of apps and innovation to make sure that we have SMEs and startups building innovative products. In the same way that you might go to the Google Play Store or the Android Store to buy apps, we want a wide ecosystem of apps that can help patients to take control of their healthcare. And that can help the NHS because it makes it more responsive, it makes it more data-driven, and it means the money that the government is putting into the NHS goes a lot further. In every other aspect of our lives, we expect instant, high-quality access to data and care. That should be the same in the NHS, and I'm delighted that the government is, in fact, rolling out the app that I proposed in this paper. And then thirdly, we need to increase the amount of money the NHS spends on R&D. As we increase the total budget in the NHS, we need to make sure that a growing proportion of that is spent on R&D to make sure that our doctors, our nurses, our NHS staff can adapt and adopt to that new technology. We need to make sure that they're not falling behind. So we need a new WhatsApp-style messaging system for doctors, nurses and medical staff to replace the pagers and the old cellular telephones that many of our doctors and nurses are using. And change is possible. Change is difficult, but it is possible. In the Northwest, in the St Helens and Knowsley NHS Trust, they have spent £1.3 million digitising 100 million pages of NHS records, but they reckon it saves them £1.4 million every year. So the savings and the economic argument is very strong. So in the coming decade, we need to be brave enough and be bold enough to harness the power of these new technologies and to make sure that the NHS is truly digital. And if we can achieve that, we'll end up not only with paperless systems, but most importantly, powerful patients that the NHS is there to serve in the first place.
Thanks very much. Some very wide-ranging set of views there. Not much social care, which I think we may come back to. But Nick, can I hear the perspective from the pharmacy sector?
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks for hosting us today. I think, realistically, I've been through a lot of reviews. I know it's hard to believe, but I've been a pharmacist for about 20 years. And I can't believe it's going to take another half of my career again before the NHS has a plan that's ready to be implemented. How do we even know what healthcare and social care will look like in 2028? I think it's constantly evolving and constantly changing. But as a frontline member of primary healthcare team, I do believe we need to get the right balance between the immediate now and the long-term investment. And that can be a real challenge for policymakers and for people that are in charge of our NHS. I think it's going to involve a primary healthcare team that's working at the top of its ticket, that's delivering the best that it can. I think to build on what's already been said, that's going to require integration. It's going to require technological integration, not necessarily integration around place, but integration around connection, healthcare closer to people's home, within the neighbourhoods that they live. And I think if we have got a 10-year plan, prevention, I feel, is going to be absolutely the key. And wouldn't it be great to have a highly trained, cost-efficient healthcare professional 20 minutes from 96% of the population by public transport or walking, with 1.6 million visits per day, where the average person visits 14 times a year. Wouldn't it be great if we would turn those places from a centre of illness into a centre of wellness and help deliver better healthcare closer to home? Thanks.
Thanks very much. Robert, can I hear some of your views on the debate so far and where you think the future should be going?
Sure. So I'd like to start by thanking the National Pharmacy Association for sponsoring us today and supporting us. Not just because obviously it's nice to have people sponsoring and supporting us, but because it's a reminder, as indeed were Alan's comments and indeed Neil's, that the NHS or the healthcare system is about more than just hospitals. I think one of the great problems that the NHS has had is that, and continues to have, is that hospitals and the acutes are the gorillas in the room. They swallow the attention, they swallow the money. And actually, if we're going to be coming up with a plan for the NHS, quite a lot of it, I think, needs to be about moving as much as possible out of hospitals. It needs to be about getting pharmacists to do more. It needs to be about getting nurses to do more. It's slightly ridiculous that the incredibly trained professionals even in hospitals, incredibly trained professionals are sort of having to have their work signed off by junior doctors who've been doing it for about a tenth of the amount of time they have. Why shouldn't we be just saving the doctors for the stuff which actually needs their expertise? But and social care obviously is a huge issue. When I was a colleague of Laura's at the Telegraph, I hope I played a small part in shifting the debate away about the A&E crisis, away from the numbers coming in through the doors, and more towards about the pathway out of the hospital at the end, because it was quite clear then that that was where the problems were cascading back through the system. The NHS, I'm sort of so fascinated by the NHS because every time I think I understand it, I find a new layer of weird. It's kind of like it's fractally weird and broken and strange in quite a lot of areas. Every time you think you've got a handle on how it operates, or every layer of bureaucracy, you find another sort of reform from the 1980s which created this thing that's still there. So there are an enormous number of things to talk about. So I'd just like to sort of check off quite a few things. Obviously, Alan has spoken about technology. I think we do need to make sure. All too often in the past, the money coming into the NHS has gone towards either patching up the holes every winter in terms of deficits, just kind of getting through the trauma of that season, or it's gone to just straight into salaries. We need to really think about how we can spend it on the things which will enhance productivity going forward. There's the obvious high-level point that without growth, we can't pay for an NHS at all. There's a reason that David Cameron's manifesto and Margaret Thatcher's manifestos all sort of led with, thanks to the wonderful booming economy that we have delivered, we are able to invest record sums in the NHS. Ultimately, the demographics mean that there is no path to funding the NHS on a maybe not a 10-year horizon, but on a 20, 30, 40-year horizon, if the economy isn't actually growing. But I want to take issue with something that Neil said, which is, the entire debate about the NHS is focused on numbers, on sort of 3.2%, 3.4%, 4%. We did a sort of very basic correlation exercise, looking at NHS productivity versus NHS budgets, and what we found was that the more money the NHS got, the worse it tended to spend it, and the less money the NHS got, the better it tended to spend it, which you kind of makes sense. Now, obviously, that's not an argument for cutting the NHS budget, because the productivity improvements didn't kind of compensate for the squeeze on the budgets. But it's a reminder that the difference between an NHS which matches its best productivity performance of recent years over the next 10 years and an NHS that matches its worst productivity performance of recent years over the next 10 years is astronomically greater than any difference in likely funding settlements. If we really need to think very, very carefully about how we squeeze more efficiency out. And I'll sort of mention a couple of things that we've covered in recent CPS reports, which don't necessarily have a lot to do with funding. So pay. 2/3 of the NHS budget goes on pay. If you're not going to look at how the pay goes, then by definition, you've limited yourself to quite a sort of narrow spectrum of what the NHS is actually doing. And the NHS pay system is really, really weird. There is, without talking about the level of pay at all, there is no way within the system for hospital managers, for team leaders to incentivise their staff to achieve particular outcomes. There is no such thing as like performance-related pay within the NHS. It has the lowest ratio of performance-related pay of pretty much any organisation within the Western world. The only bonus system that we could find in it was a system for consultants, which is basically a lifetime achievement award, that you apply for it and you kind of keep it forever until someone more qualified comes along. There's no, I mean, that's just kind of strange. Likewise, the spacebound system, which is in operation. Another issue is medical liabilities. Off the top of my head, I can't remember the exact order, but liabilities for NHS malpractice are now up there with nuclear decommissioning and public sector pensions as the largest tens of £billion liabilities that the country faces. And that is largely due to the fact that when the system was originally set up, the NHS didn't do rehab. It just did sort of basic operations. So if something went wrong on the operating table, you were going to need private care for the rest of your life to treat you, to help you with the results of that incompetence. Nowadays we have a situation where people are still, the payout levels are still being set on that basis of this will pay for private care for the rest of your life, but people then use NHS rehab services anyway. It's really not a popular thing to say we should reform this, because it sounds great until you start seeing headlines about wicked government wants to take money away from children who have been left disabled after accidents on the operating table. But this is something we're going to have to really think about, because both in a hospital level and on a GP level, this is actually getting to the insurance bills are getting to the point where they're deterring people from getting into medicine. On social care. The safeguarding revolution has been fascinating. So the response to the tragedies in Winterbourne View, the tragedy both in hospitals and in care homes, was to say, okay, we need to impose very strict staff ratios because we can't have patients being left unattended, being parked in these kind of, I think the phrase was like the TARDISes. There were these sort of corridors full of trolleys where patients were just left, and horrible. It was their treatment was genuinely horrible. But that in turn has created a culture where that's contributed to problems in social care, where social care homes are increasingly reluctant to take in patients with multiple complex needs, because they want the patients who aren't going to get them sued and they're not going to have to devote that much resources to them. And again, there's no ideal solution, there's no ideal balance to it. But it was striking talking to doctors how they will say that patients learn the language. They've learned the language of safeguarding. They've learned what levers to pull if they want to get extra attention and special treatment. And you'd have these. You talk to them and you hear about kind of patients who are perfectly healthy, but they just don't like the care home they're being sent to, or they don't like the council house they've been offered, and they want to stay in hospital. I'm not saying this is the entire solution to all of the NHS's problems, but it's certainly a contributing factor. And I think there's a really interesting structural tension as we go forward. So Simon Stevens is currently writing his plan, and his the new idea is all about integration, which has been mentioned already, and the idea that currently we pay to perform currently we sort of pay per operation, we pay per procedure. So every sort of gateway you go through in the NHS has a sum of money attached to it, and it makes a lot more sense to pay for whole of life care, to incentivise people to kind of treat patients as well as possible for the lowest possible cost, which may include quite a lot of preventative stuff, may include doing stuff in pharmacies, will almost certainly include better integration with social care. The question is how that squares with the introduction of choice and competition, which was the sort of driving force of the NHS reforms not just under the Conservatives but under the Blair government. If you go back and read the stuff that the Blair team were writing about, they were trying desperately to work out how you got, how you incentivize the NHS system to do what was best for patients as opposed to best for hospitals. And this is a sort of continuing tension. So there are all sorts of things we can do and ideas we can explore. But what I hope is that a plan drawn up by NHS England, isn't going to just do what is politically possible and politically convenient for NHS England. I mean, this is why we spent quite a lot of time over the last 2 years calling for a royal commission into the NHS, because the idea was that we need to look at it in the round, and we need to look at it just beyond the hospitals and beyond the acutes. So I've been slightly throwing out ideas there, but I hope some of them of interest.
Great. So can I just pick up on, I suppose, what we'll have a bit of a panel debate before we go to questions. I suppose I'd like to start with what I think is the most difficult one, which everyone's touched on, but social care. We've got a social care green paper coming up. We've had some hints. I interviewed Matt Hancock last week on the way to China, where he was talking about his interest in some kind of system of auto-enrolment in the same way that we have for pensions. But what struck me is I suppose everyone has said social care is, the big one. It's very, very difficult. I haven't actually heard specifically what would each of you want to be in that social care green paper. What do you want the future of social care to look like? Can I start with you, Neil, because you raised the difficult subject, so now you can solve it as well.
Well, thank you very much for doing that. So I think certainly the NHS Confederation, I don't think we're going to come out with how the government or who they should charge or not charge for social care. We accept that it's a means-tested system and that is likely to remain. I think it looks on the face of it unaffordable to simply introduce free social care. I think the answer is that what I would make a plea to all political parties who throw out death tax, dementia tax, doesn't matter, you've all done it to each other and so on. We do need to have a rather serious grown-up cross-party debate about how we deal with an issue. There's no doubt that there's generational inequality at the moment. There are huge assets being held by older people, and I think it is perfectly reasonable for government to have that debate going forward. Our concern is probably at the other side of it in terms of how the service is provided and getting the money to it. In the short term, and I think the solutions to the social care problem will take some time. There are obviously quick wins like some of the Dill Knot stuff you could in theory do, but again very controversial, and again whether government would be willing to go ahead with those. But I think from our point of view, the social care system over the next 2 to 3 years will need another bung. It will need another sum of money. And I suppose from our standpoint, where we might take a rather different view from the Local Government Association and a closer view to the Treasury, which is if it seems to us highly unlikely that the government is simply going to hand over money to local government and say, well, you can spend it exactly how you like, but please solve the social care problem. Therefore, it's likely to be ring-fenced if there is any money. And I think from the NHS side of things, saying that it should be ring-fenced from social care would not cause us a problem. I think that is a reasonable thing for government to do, but it will need a substantial, significant injection of funds, because what we've seen is a social care system which, when I was Chief Executive of the King's Fund, we described then, back in 2007, as grossly underfunded. And of course, since then, it has had flat or diving down funding. And the level of demand, of course, across that piece. What has saved it, that's the system, not the elderly people, is a means testing system, which what local authorities do is constantly raise the threshold for eligibility, so that fewer and fewer people are actually eligible for that care. And that means very significant numbers of people who aren't rich by any manner of means, but who find themselves in a position where they're not getting the support they need. So we need a short-term bung. I'm dodging the question about which bits of the means testing should be reformed, but we absolutely need a system which I think does reflect the change in the generational mix that we've seen over the last few years.
So Alan, can I ask you, what sort of system would you favour? Do you think does the government have appetite for any kind of radical reform here, or is it going to be more sort of tinkering around at the edges, do you think?
So the ageing population and the growing population is one of the biggest challenges that any government faces, and I think that even in my own county of Hampshire, by 2020, 28% of people are going to be over 65, around a third will have dementia, so it is a big challenge. And actually you see across government, it isn't just a challenge for the health and social care department. You'll see that in the industrial strategy, it's one of the grand challenges that we are trying to tackle using private sector and technological solutions. So it is a big challenge, and I think there's really 3 things I'd like to see in the Green Paper, which I think is going to come out later this year, and I think is really going to be a game changer. I think there's 3 principles. The first is about helping people to live independently. So given the growing and ageing population, it's not going to be possible to have everybody living in domiciliary care homes. The truth is, people want to be at home, they want to be in their communities, they want to be with their friends and neighbours, and therefore we can use technology, and it's a theme I want to come back to help people to do that. So For example, in Hampshire County Council has teamed up with Amazon to deploy its Echo speaker system, which many of you will know about, where patients can be reminded to take medication. They can be using technology to access help remotely. So helping people to live independently for longer, to be with their friends and family, is certainly an important part of what I'd like to see in a future system. I think secondly, I want to see personal responsibility. As you rightly said, it's not an obligation that the state on its own can discharge. It's simply too great a problem, too expensive a problem for the state through the general taxation to be able to pay for everybody's care long into the future. So I think we are going to see some mechanism where people have to save up, whether that's through a care ISA or a care pension, or some other mechanism where part of your salary or part of your disposable income is used to help you in old age. And I think that's right. As a Conservative Party, we want responsibility as well as state support. And I think thirdly, I want to see the state empowering the private sector to come up with solutions. I think not only through the industrial strategy, but also through much of the work that the NHS is doing to promote innovation. We need to empower startups, large businesses to try and come up with solutions, particularly technological, that help people to live longer, to live more fulfilled lives once they've retired. So a combination of private sector empowerment, greater use of technology, and underpinned by a principle of personal responsibility and helping people live independently are really some of the things I want to see in the Green Paper. And I think if we do that, we get further towards a sustainable and compassionate solution to a positive thing. You know, the ageing population is often seen as a negative and a burden, but actually living longer, having higher quality of life is a good thing, and it just reflects the fact that our economy is strong, the country is being more prosperous, and actually people can live older, more fulfilled, enjoyable lives.
And Nick, can I ask about the role of the National Pharmacy Association? Do you see pharmacists as having an extended role or an increasing role in terms of responding to the social care needs?
So I think really the clues in the question really, community pharmacy tends to be at the heart of its community. Quite often we are a first point of call for people who access healthcare and need healthcare advice quickly. I think technology will work and be an enabler for some parts of that. Some people would actually also do like the face-to-face contact, and I think technology should be a supplementary part to that rather than a complete replacement, which I'm sure we'd all agree. I think for me, there's something about within the wider efficiencies of health and social care. There's something about seeing the right person at the right time, first time, and again, to some of those things around the wider system. I think there's a role to be played there. You know, 8% of A&E appointments potentially could be seen in a community pharmacy. You know, when those people at crisis at weekends with lots of opening times and pharmacies that are open for extended hours. You know, if we were technologically integrated within the NHS system and social care system more, we could potentially be signposting people around the system appropriately. Again, other parts of primary care, you tend to use your most expensive resource first. Community pharmacy is a very cost-effective way of deploying healthcare. And I think that a better integrated part of that primary care team to signpost along the right time could be really, really helpful. There has been trials, which I did. I come from Cornwall, around some of that rurality, so I absolutely get that. We did a thing around community pharmacists going out to visit patients within their own home. I've known these people for 20 years. The stuff that you can pick up there is really, really interesting, unique, and has a knock-on health economy benefit to the whole system. So, I would say community pharmacy, clues in the title. We know our patients, we know our people, and I think we could be a part of integrating that system.
And Rob, can I ask you, you're going to be interviewing Matt Hancock, I think, here tomorrow night, and we'll get the chance to put him on the spot about what he wants, what he thinks will be in the social care green paper, or what should be. Do you have any views on what you'd like to see there?
Well, so I'm going to have to be slightly cautious on this because we have some work underway at the CPS on this, and I don't want to sort of spoil anything that that isn't quite ready for prime time. What I would say is, I think in terms of social care, if you talk to NHS leaders, the last thing they want is, given the inexorable growth in demand for NHS services and the inexorable growth in demand for social care services just based on pure demography, the last thing they really want is to kind of add those two together and have the whole thing funded out of general taxation, because you're making something which is really, really hard to do, even harder to do. The part of the problem, though, is the public. No one's ever sort of really explained to the public that there is this division between this thing called the NHS, and there is this division between this thing called social care, and we expect you, and you can get the first one for free, but you have to pay for the second one, except if you get certain conditions, in which case you're fine, but if you get other conditions, then you're going to have to sell your house. You know, as we saw at the election, when people were exposed to those facts, they weren't that keen on the idea. So, I mean, I think the intergenerational point is right. We are sort of falling into a system where there's effectively a kind of apartheid between people who own houses which they can use to fund their care and have pension, and people who don't. And, you know, so having those resources at the end of your life. I mean, I think the two things that any social care green paper needs to address from a political point of view is people's fear about getting dementia, because it's not as people think that sort of dementia and care dementia is more common than it is, and they think that social care is more expensive than it is. Actually, not quite a lot of people don't need that much money, but then there are other people who need a lot more money. So it's kind of it's saving people from the lottery element of that, which I think is why there's the talk of auto enrolment. It's like the idea of like almost sort of a collective insurance scheme. And the other thing people want not to have to do is to sell their houses. So you know, it's asking quite a lot of any green paper. But if Matt Hancock can come up with a way that, you know, protects you if you get dementia and avoids you having to sell your house, I think then that will be the politically saleable version.
And I'll just do one more question for the panel before we sort of throw it open to questions. So in terms of, I was struck, Neil, that you were talking about the NHS 10-year plan, that the risk is that it's effectively a bidding process for 17 different parts of the NHS. I suppose if there was one thing that you want from the NHS plan, either in terms of a specific priority or maybe in terms of a direction, you know, should we be shifting away from targets or whatever, is it possible to just highlight, for purposes of brevity, something you would pull out as something that you think should be a priority? I might start with you, Rob, to mix it up a little bit, if I can chuck that one at you.
God, there are so many. I think just it's a horrible cliche, but a willingness to think the unthinkable. I mean, just to talk about things like pay and like capital budget. You just to sort of not to sort of take the system as it is as the basis, but to sort of think more about how we how we sort of achieve the ends we want to in terms of universal healthcare free at the point of delivery. How we would do that in an ideal world, and whether we can nudge things in a right direction, which might include using more pharmacies, for example.
And Alan, what would there be something that you would identify either in terms of a theme or a direction that you'd want to see come out of the plan?
Yeah, so I think the overriding objective has to be the total transformation of the NHS from being a paper-first service into a digital-only service, because once you do that, that unlocks AI and big data, and that further unlocks three other things which help improve our healthcare, which is the detection of diseases, the improved control of patients in the system, and better communication between medical staff. The minute you eradicate paper as a medium in the NHS is the moment when you can deliver all those three things, and unless you do that, you can't.
And Nick, can I come to you on the same point? Is there something either pharmacy related or something that you would be sort of lobbying for? What would you like to see?
So I think for me it's be brave. The system needs to be brave in its transformation. For us personally, I think the one ask for me would be a contract that lasts for longer than 1 year. Allow it to be longer so that I can invest in my business, so that I can invest in my pharmacy to allow me to deliver the needs that the system requires. So the one big ask for me was not a year-to-year, jump-to-jump contract, something that allows me to be that private sector partner that helps invest.
And Neil, how about you? To avoid the 17 bidding, the bidding from 17 parties.
Well, I think we've probably talked about it in a better way here than in the 17. So the three of the absolute pillars that we have to have is getting the workforce sorted out. The workforce will have to look very different even in 10 years' time, and that's a really slow ship to start turning around, given the length of time it takes to train a healthcare professional, especially at the higher end, as it were, about how long we we do that. But we need to think very differently. We can't simply go on producing more doctors and nurses. That won't do it. And we need new kinds of professional, new kinds of worker coming into the NHS to do that. Secondly, just to endorse the point, the technology, I think the NHS has been poor, frankly, at embracing technology. The fax machine line is a good one and a reasonable challenge to the service. But doesn't start. It's not just in the last few years. Tony Blair complained about the NHS embracing technology at the launch of the last NHS plan in 2000, and I think we've still been slow. There are lots of complex reasons for that. But now, unless we take up the challenge now, we are going to miss something, because we need to be at 5 to 12 rather than at 11:15 where we're currently sitting. So there's a big task there, and part of that is about a partnership with industry. But those are kind of pillars that we need. If you want the overall narrative, the big question is, how do we create a high quality health and care system where we can sustain demand? Because demand is the issue that we're facing going forward. And unless we succeed, all those things will help us to do that. But unless we start, that should be the exam question. Are you creating a health and care system? If we go on with the structure as it currently is, we will be in exactly the same position as we're in now, which is an overcooking acute sector, people pointing fingers at each other and saying that you're not doing your job properly, why is that not working, if only primary care were this, and so on. So we need to reform all the bits of the system. We need to get them working much more closely and more seamlessly together and get our supply chain sorted out, but ultimately with the aim of trying to put those interventions in, particularly for long-term conditions. That's the fundamental change in the model from a 20th century system. We now have a huge number of people who've not just got one condition, but who've got lots of conditions. And the challenge of a healthcare and care system, managing that group of people, enabling them to live in their own homes, having interventions there that stop them from yo-yoing in and out of the acute sector, that's the biggest challenge I think we face.
Great. So we'll go to questions now, we've got a guy here with a microphone. So I think we'll take them in threes. If we could start maybe second row along there.
Hello. Quick point on faxes. Actually, last week, Richard Corbridge, the CDIO at Leeds Teaching Hospitals, launched the Axe the Fax campaign, which is quite interesting. I'd recommend you look into that. My question is, to what extent will STPs and ICSs play an important role in integration of care in the future, and what will they kind of look like in 10 years' time?
Okay, and there was a lady over here.
Hi there, Rebecca McPhee from Media Weybridge, a healthcare scientist working on the front line. So my first point is to remind especially the MPs and the Confederation that it's not just doctors and nurses, there's allied health professionals, there's healthcare scientists, and we can be the solution to all the problems. Second point is, especially to the MP, you were talking about personal responsibility, about the iCare, ISAs and pensions. Don't forget personal responsibility for your own health. So using all these apps and technology to monitor your own health in your home, I think the policy needs to be more prevention rather than actually trying to cure things. It's prevention with personal responsibility.
Right, I'll take a third question. The gentleman at the back there. I think there's a microphone coming your way.
Hello, my name is Brian Weller. All I've heard so far is all about spending money. Who's in charge of procurement, and are you getting value for money from all of your spending? Are you doing wholesaling between trusts? Are you getting price competition, which is so seen as negatively by the Labour Party?
Okay, very broad range of questions there. I think we'll just take them in order. So in terms of looking to the future, what will integrated care systems, sustainability and transformation partnerships, there's an awful lot of really hideous jargon in the NHS, but what will it look like in 10 years' time? Rob, can I maybe start with you on that?
Sorry, I can just rattle through all three. I mean, I think I like the ICO's idea. I think one of the keys is to make sure that they don't sort of impinge on the element of sort of patient choice, and that it's that that there is still that market mechanism within the NHS. Although I recognise that many within the NHS would not would not like that. At all. But I think one of the challenges, though, is that that model kind of works quite well in certain distinct geographies. I mean, obviously Manchester being the obvious example where they've started doing it, but there are others where it can be rolled out. What I wonder about is what we do in places where that doesn't quite work, where there's not a sort of a network of there's not a beautiful integratable network, and it's more patchy. I completely agree about the personal responsibility point. Someone sort of mentioned, one doctor mentioned to me recently his sort of pet theory that the fundamental problem with the NHS is the consumer society, that we have moved since 1948 from taking what we're given to demanding what we personally feel that we want, and so effectively that the NHS has always been an exercise in matching matching demand, demand, and demand is accelerating because everyone is now demanding more and better, than they used to. So procurement, really good point. I can't remember who did the work, but there's been lots and lots of stuff about sort of 65 different prices for gloves, for rubber gloves, and that there's no with the scale of the NHS, we should be able to do a lot more about sensible joined up procurement. And in fact, actually, one of the things that we've that you could do, which sort of never gets talked about, is yes, the NHS in England and the NHS in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland are separate entities, but ultimately they are still buying the same things. So it's not beyond the wit of man for for them to pool their bargaining power and get lower prices for all their stuff they're buying, from everything from drugs to scalpels.
Alan, can you pick up on those? Maybe is there anyone you particularly want to focus on?
Yeah, I'll just comment briefly on all three. I think the STPs have an important role to play in delivering the vision of the NHS that I set out. One of Matt Hancock's first moves was to launch a £412 million STP technology transformation fund to help STPs to upgrade technology in their areas. And I think STPs are a useful tool because they're regionally based, they involve all local stakeholders, and I think doing it at a local level actually means that we can be much more tuned to the medical tech needs of patients in those areas. So this STP Tech Transformation Fund is particularly important, and I obviously look forward to seeing the first set of bids and how the money is used. On personal responsibility and allied health professionals, I completely agree with you. I think personal responsibility does have to be matched with prevention as well, and I think the app culture, the ecosystem of apps that I mentioned is a good way of doing that. I think if you go onto the App Store or the Google Play Store, you can find so many types of apps, from apps that help children to brush their teeth to apps that help you monitor your heart rate and maintain a healthy diet. So I think there's a lot to be said for that. And then on the point about value for money, I think you're absolutely right. We're investing so much money, we need to make sure that every pound is used carefully, and procurement is a very important area where money can be saved. I think one other area that we have to be frank about where money can be saved is the impact of automation and AI in the health service. The reality is that over the coming years, the sight of somebody pushing trolleys of paper records around hospitals is going to diminish. The use of folders and paper and records is going to diminish, and the replacement of people with automated workers, particularly in the back office, is going to be a growing part of the NHS landscape. So one of the things that I've recommended in my paper is that for every pound saved in the NHS through automation, robotics and AI, we plough that straight back into the front line and invest in our doctors and nurses so that we reap the benefits. So by saving money at the back end, we can make sure that frontline care receives a growing amount of the NHS's funding.
And Nick, can you pick up on, again, take your pick, what interests you?
Yeah, okay, so I'll go for three really quickly, just for the interest of time. So integrated care systems and STPs. Let's have pharmacy at a seat at the table, please, because I think as an integrated part of primary care, that would be much more important. Prevention and personal responsibility, allied healthcare professionals, absolutely agree as an allied healthcare professional. I think one of the things I would say is there is a myriad of choice out there at the minute. So actually there's the interpretation, every frontline clinician gets the heart sink when the patient comes in and said, I've just Googled this. So there's the interpretation of who actually helps people deal with all that data and that massive stuff that comes to make sure that's sensible. And as part of the NHS where private and public money meets, I think, community pharmacy is shown to be cost effective. There's a great PwC report done in 2016 which says that the community pharmacy on average delivers an extra £250,000 worth of income for every, on average. And also, as far as procurement is concerned, there's 11,000 community pharmacies all trying to buy medicines slightly cheaper than each other, which is why we've delivered around £10 billion worth of savings over £10 billion worth of savings since 2004, 2005. So, if I can't pay my bills, then, I don't pay my mortgage. I don't have a magic trust, be £1 million overdrawn or anything like that. Real frontline healthcare of having to make those books balance is part of my world. So procurement, yeah, I can give you a hand.
And Neil, can you pick up on the points raised?
Yeah, a couple. So STPs and ICSs are a device. In a sense, they're a way of getting round some aspects of the 2012 Act. I think some of them have done really good stuff. A lot of it depends, as has been shown by numerous reports, on the trust and relationships at local level. And in terms of developing a system across the whole NHS, not sure that we can just rely on trust and people getting along well together. So I think there is a question about how we move at pace and scale to introduce transformation into the NHS. And I think that a lot of support needs to go into ICSs and STPs and encouragement for them to develop forward, including making sure that the incentives from the centre are right. And the incentives from the centre does not mean sitting on people's backs all the time and issuing endless series of instructions and demands from the centre. So I think it's a question of moving really from outputs to outcomes, and of making sure that we give freedom at local level for people to develop this. I think one of the challenges for SDPs and ICSs up to now, frankly, is that they're overwhelmed by the here and now. They're trying to make their books balance at the end of the year. They cannot restrict their demand. These are systems that just have people hitting them all the time. So it's extraordinarily difficult. It's not like shutting down a library service. You can't just shut down your A&E. You still have to have the people coming through the system. If you can't get them out at the other end of the process, has already been said, they're in your hospital, they're still running up the bill. So the way in which we incentivize the system is not right at the moment, and we need to absolutely solve that. I think SDPs and ICSs are probably the future, but they absolutely will need to develop as we go forward. Just on procurement, I think there is a recognition that we probably went too far in terms of saying every foundation trust should do its own thing and just procure in its own way. There are obviously huge advantages in getting a properly centralised system. There are aspects of that in place, but I'm no expert on this, but it's not regarded as satisfactory, and there needs to be further reform in the way that we procure, never mind Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, even within England itself. Adding those three extra bits of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland would add a little bit more, but NHS England, of course, is bigger than all the three others put together. Well,
that's why it would really help Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, because they'd have the kind of massive,
Yeah, they would indeed. Sorry, I was looking at it from an Anglo perspective, which as a Scot is terrible. but in terms of just saying England needs to sort out its own issue anyway, as well as reaching out to those other places.
Great, I think we've got time for one more round of questions. If everyone could just keep the questions short and punchy, and we'll keep the answers short and punchy as well. There's a gentleman right just next to him.
Hello there, thank you. I'm a borough councillor and non-exec director of a social care company. I'm delighted that regarding the plans given my age, in the future I'll look forward to the care, but I have a mother who I care for who is 91, and she wouldn't be happy with the apps and the development and the connection that she couldn't enjoy benefits from. I'm also concerned about the scale of the potential use of IT and the priority that would be given. And as a user of these services or an observer of these services on a almost daily basis now in a multiple disciplines, I would observe from what I've seen across the board is that really what should happen is a review of the communication that currently occurs and look at ways of digitising those current connections before determining whether they're the right connections, and do it in 2 stages. Make sure that people can do the job they're doing today more efficiently, and then change their job by prioritising and changing and using the technology to drive efficiency and cost saving. But I think if you go too far in one hop, trying to integrate new technology with new structures, you will actually stop the healthcare professionals who are desperately trying to deliver great service at the point of delivery from actually increasing their delivery.
Okay, we'll take a couple more. The gentleman, yeah, just there.
Thank you. Mark Gately, Old Bexley and Sidcup Conservatives, also campaigns volunteer for the Motor Neurone Disease Association. Robert, you mentioned that CHC funding was in place, but that the care homes didn't want to take on board people with major and complex needs, one of which would be motor neurone disease. We're aware of 3 CCGs that have placed a cap on CHC for major and complex needs. That's 10% over normal. Therefore, should there not be in place some monitoring and accountability for CCGs or major and complex conditions?
Okay, and one final one. There's a lady just along the same row, I think the same row.
Thank you. My name is Jenny Vaughan. I work for Stop AIDS and NGO. Last month, Matt Hancock said that drug companies need to stop holding the NHS to ransom over the cost of medicines. And I'm sure everyone's aware of crowdfunding campaigns for people suffering with different diseases that the NHS simply can't afford to buy the medicines to treat. We know that a lot of medicines that we have are paid for by the public. In fact, 2/3 of all upfront drug R&D costs are covered by the taxpayer. So I wonder if the panel would comment on, firstly, the issue of transparency in R&D and in the cost of medicines that are bought from pharmaceutical companies, and then secondly, on the importance of public interest conditions that are on public funding to ensure that the taxpayer is benefiting from the investments that we're making.
Okay, great. Well, I think it might be best to, if perhaps people can take their pick out of those, because there's a very varied range there. The sort of the human side of the sort of apps revolution and the call for a 2-stage process in terms of digitisation, caps on CHCs, and again, and this question about, is the pharmaceutical industry ripping off the NHS? What needs to be done on R&D? So it's pretty broad range. So Neil, can you take your pick from those?
Thank you. So I don't think I absolutely take the point about some people not engaging with technology, and you have to provide choice so that people are able to access services. But I don't think we've got a choice about saying, do we change the nature of work or do we introduce technology? We need to introduce both, and we need to do that at pace and scale. But there are, and of course you have to absolutely understand where your user is coming from. It's not the laptop, which is the machine designed by IT people for IT people. It's the iPad, which started with the user and works that way out. And that's how we need to introduce new technology going forward. On CCGs, I think, to be fair to CCGs, I think a lot of the time they're between a rock and a hard place in terms of the amount of money that they have and all the demands that are made upon it. But I absolutely take the point that the whole issue of continuing care and the funding of that needs to be tackled centrally and understood where to make it a safe system. And then again on the comment about holding to ransom, we were strongly critical of the drug companies that were responsible in terms of saying that Avastin could not be used for a new purpose. And that was a fault actually of the regulatory system, which meant that they could simply not apply for that drug to be regulated to do that condition, and then the NHS was having to pay far too much in order to treat that conditions. We should have a system that absolutely balances that. But I think in fairness to the industry, the NHS has not always been a very good partner, and we need to work out how we partner much more effectively so that there is a win-win. The amount of investment that goes into research and the amount of investment that goes into clinical trials is huge, and the NHS benefits from those. And if we are to make, and the industrial strategy makes this clear, if we are going to make a success, and this is why the NHS should not just be seen as a sucker up of money. It's actually something that contributes to the economy as well as is a user of public expenditure. But if we are going to make the life sciences strategy work effectively, it absolutely relies on good partnership with the NHS, and that has to be going forward. I think Matt Hancock's comments about holding to ransom perhaps had something to do that we're in the middle of the PPRS, which is a negotiation with the drug industry around pricing going forwards, and I hope we'll move on to more happy ground going forward, where we genuinely have to see benefits on both sides.
Nick, can you pick up on that?
So I can pick up on the IT. So I think from an IT point of view, two parts to it. One is the IT that enables and connects the system. So community pharmacists having access to summary care records is a really big win, but wouldn't it be great access to full clinical record? That could help deliver a lot more stuff. You're right, we've done some research which says 68% of people in an older demographic still prefer face-to-face. However, IT should be part of the solution for those people that need it and want it, but I see it very much as complementary. As far as medicines are concerned, I agree we need some innovation. We need to have the right development for new medicines. They need to be cost-effective. Industry needs to be the right partner. From a community pharmacy point of view, the pricing structure is sometimes quite tricky. We have a contract which at the minute means we have to dispense some medicines at a loss. The mechanism for getting that money back is sometimes slow, laborious, and is tricky. And when you're trying to invest in your business in frontline healthcare, but you're making a loss on dispensing the medication as a core activity, then that can become difficult when you're making investment decisions. I come back to my earlier point about a more robust and more stable funding structure that would allow for those different services to be picked up.
Rob, can you pick up on the points raised?
Yeah, so I just say, I completely agree. There are patients who don't want to be sort of seen by video conference or treated by app, but there's a more fundamental cultural issue which Alan refers to both in his remarks and in his excellent report, which is, the NHS is. There are two organisations, as far as I can make out, left in the world in which the bulk of formal communication is done by formal letters written down between people and put in a kind of in the post. Which one is doctors and patients. You get the kind of CC'd thing from your 3 weeks later from your GP saying, "I have seen Robert, and I can confirm that he hasn't actually broken his ankle, he's just sprained it, and I've referred him to this." Why is that being done with a stamp on it? It makes no sense. And the other organisation which does that, of course, is government, in which ministers communicate with each other by the sending of formal letters. In one beautiful case, when Michael Fallon had a job in the business department and the energy department, his first job was to write a letter to himself asking for something, which he then replied to himself turning down. And on the point about multiple complex communities, yes, I mean obviously there should be accountability, but as Neil says, this is in quite a lot of ways the heart of the problem. The NHS treats us all, but the cost and the effort and the strain is on how it deals with people with multiple complex needs, usually quite if you spend the night sitting in A&E, people of all ages, races, colours and creeds will walk through the door. The ones who are left behind there overnight are overwhelmingly the 80-somethings, the 90-somethings, the ones who are going in through the system, and those are the people who we are. It's in many ways a tribute to the success of the NHS, the fact that we are living long enough to catch these diseases. But that is the problem. That is the thing we need to address, and that is the thing to come back full circle to our topic, that is the thing any plan for the NHS needs to have at its heart.
And Alan, can I go over to you for the final word on this? What are your thoughts?
Well, just a short supplementary on the point made by the councillor about the human touch in the NHS. I think the NHS is such a valued service because it is based on human care and compassion, and I wouldn't see technology displacing that. I would see technology complementing that. So I want to see technology being used by medical professionals, doctors, nurses, allied professionals to remove some of the laborious, difficult tasks so that they have more time to spend with older people and to care for them with humanity.
That's great. Well, thanks ever so much. It's been a really interesting debate. Thank you very much to the National Pharmacy Association. We've heard some quite broad messages there, I guess, in terms of NHS planning. Think about the workforce, think the unthinkable, be digitally driven, and I think a very broad message to be brave, so to take some risks along the way. Thanks ever so much for joining in the debate. I do appreciate it. Thank you.
Really enjoyed it. I love the way you're thinking.